sometimes I've had to turn down a lot of things that I thought that I had a passion for. And there have been seasons where I haven't been able to help women as much or go get coffee because I'm at a ball game with my kiddos and I only have so many years left with them. So no mom guilt is what I'm all for.
Welcome back to another episode of Making the Leap. So glad to have you here today with what I think is now the third mom to mom kind of special episode that we've been putting out here that has had some really great feedback, good reviews, where I just get to sit down by myself and talk with another mom. We've talked with some different people that have been in different places with their faith journeys, with parenting, with their own faith walk. And so I'm glad today to be here with somebody who I think has had quite a different journey from myself, which I love because I think that always gives good conversation. We're here today with Angela Swain. She is her big title for me besides mom is she's a professor of music. And she is with Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. So glad to have you with us today, Angela. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for inviting me.
I will tell you, I didn't tell you this on purpose because I wanted to, this is kind of like my initial way of how I found you. I was at Midwestern last fall, I believe it was, when the For the Church conference was happening.
Yes, right.
And you were up there leading the music worship for Jen Wilkin.
Right.
And I was there because I had heard of Jen Wilkin, knew a little bit about her, wanted to hear more in person. And then there was this tremendous music, singing happening, and I was loving all of it. And I thought, okay, that's great. You know, we went on into the big gym and we were eating our lunches and there was a panel up there and Jen Wilkin's up there again. And there's, some other ladies, one of whom was you. One of them was you. And I was listening to all of you speak. Great. Finish my day, go on. And about a month later, I was surfing social media like I do. And all of a sudden there was you connected to Midwestern. And I thought, I'm like, well, she looks super familiar. And then I start doing some searching on Facebook and I thought, well, she's a parent of a kid like my age kid. Like, what? And I started connecting all the dots. And I went from being like, oh my gosh, you're on a panel, like fangirling a little bit,
right,
to being like, oh, I'm gonna see her around. I'm gonna get to know her. And it was very cool because I think that is how God works, is he starts putting people, you're not untouchable on a panel. You're not there. You're right here in the middle with everybody else doing this, right?
In the middle.
And I just thought that's huge to me. That is how God works. And I love that, that you went from like this, wow, to like, oh, we're going to get to talk. We're going to get
very regular.
I love it. It's always, but I'm glad because that just shows me that we kind of all need to be accessible to one another as moms, as Christians, as leaders all over the place. We have to be able to not be in this place of she's here and I'm here. We need to be coming together.
Comparison, that's right.
Right? I love that. Tell me a little bit so people know where you're originally from. You have a little bit of accent. They'll start to hear that a little bit. Sometimes when I'm in my mood, my Chicago accent comes out. So I think yours is going to come out too. But tell our listeners a little bit about, where you're from.
Well, I grew up in the state of Virginia, but Virginia has a lot of different facets like a diamond. You've got the D.C. area, you've got the coast, Central Virginia, the beautiful Blue Ridge Mountains, and then you've got the part of Virginia where I grew up. I was born in Roanoke, which is part of the Blue Ridge Mountains. And grew up in that area, akin right next door to Kentucky and Tennessee. A lot of my family were from eastern Tennessee. We could be at the grocery in Kentucky in 20 minutes. So it was kind of at that Daniel Boone territory, which I have a lot akin to him because he too traversed his way from the epicenter of Appalachia all the way to the middle of nowhere in Missouri. Here we are. So accents and all. But so grew up in that area. My dad had a small business. He was a fireman at first. And then after an accident, decided to be on the business side of that. But parents raised me in church. I was actually adopted
Oh,
too.
okay.
That's a whole other
Wow,
podcast.
yes.
I have a passion for helping parents and kiddos navigate those waters. Adoption can look different from every. You have
Yes.
international adoption, stateside
Yes.
adoption, mixed race adoption. Special needs, all the
Okay.
things. But grew up in Virginia. Came to know the Lord at an early age. Was raised in a kind of a county seat First Baptist Church.
Okay.
Church around every corner in Appalachia, and where there aren't corners, there are churches. So,
Yes.
but grew up kind of like a feral child in the 80s, 70s, and 80s, and but made a profession early, and but grew up in that atmosphere of Appalachia. Had grandparents that lived in Tennessee. A lot of my family is from the Deep South in Atlanta. But yeah, grew up kind of East Coast. Is my familiar territory.
And now you're here. You're in
Right.
Missouri, right? Big. I like it. I was happy to come back here to Missouri. I know sometimes people kind of look around and they're not super thrilled. How has that transition been for you coming here to Missouri from what you know, because we're landlocked.
Right.
Weather's a little different. People are different. It's just it's just a different feel sometimes. So I'm just wondering what that's been.
Yeah, fair question to someone who's not from here. And I would say, kind of skipping ahead, and the life of ministry that we've been in is akin to maybe being in the armed forces or the military. You move around quite a bit. You can, not necessarily. That's not the goal. You want to be there as long as you're there, but sometimes it doesn't always work out that way for various reasons.
Okay.
We last served in full-time ministry in Savannah, Georgia. And so from there, we got kind of that proverbial phone call. Hey, there's this seminary, which was part of the Southern Baptist Convention, which we were part of and working in. And that the convention has 6 seminaries around the country. This is one of them, the newest in terms of history, made in the 1950s, created in the 1950s, here on purpose in this area of the country. Didn't know a lot about Midwestern, though, but got that phone call that said, hey, essentially, we're looking for someone. We're going to have a need. Would y'all consider coming out of full-time ministry, coming and being back in academics, which we had been in prior, and that has its own history. But kind of the best of both worlds, where you're still in ministry, but from an educational academic standpoint, you're doing so for the purpose of placing others and training others for ministry. So this was an opportunity for us to really serve 2 areas of our lives that we're both very passionate about: ministry, serving the local church, and music as musicians. So took that call, and I will say that it was probably the first time in our marriage, just vulnerably speaking, to encourage other moms out there, because you can make big grown-up decisions when you're married and you have a family, and they're not always easy or ideal, but living on the coast, living near the water, geographically beautiful, year-round sunshine, all the things. I was probably hesitant, is probably a very light word to how I felt about that potential call. But of course, with prayer, the Lord always finds a way to move in your hearts. And so we accepted the call, came about a year later to the area.
Okay.
And that was a difficult move, but only because the stage of life, 2 very young children at the time, ages 3 and 5,
Okay.
Halfway across the country. I knew there would be differences. Having grown up in Virginia, I was very much familiar with winters and all this, the doldrums and all the things. But it was challenging just because we loved where we were. We loved the ministry. We weren't running away from anything. But at the same time, we knew that we also sought the adventure and looked forward to it. But it took a while to kind of really unite our hearts and be knitted there together with that big decision. But obedience is key.
Well, and I was going to say, I think it's such an important point to make, because I think sometimes when we think we know we're listening to God, we're listening to what He's calling us to do, we're still making that active choice, and then you're left with, oh, please let this be what I hope it's going to be. And Chris and I have experienced that as well, which we've talked about on other episodes of the podcast, where we just picked up our family and moved, and we did it with a lot of thought when we moved from here out to the East Coast, and we did it very, I don't want to say impetuously. We'd been thinking about it for a while, but we did it very quickly when we came back. And so both of those have a lot of opportunities for doubt that that can really permeate everything. And so that's why I asked how that was, but I think it's good that, you're here all these years later, and it takes time.
10
it takes
years.
time
We've been
to
here 10
feel
years.
solid in those decisions. And like you said, making them as a parent is different from making them as just a couple together. You've got a whole lot more to think about.
It affects everything. Being a parent changes everything.
Yes.
From the way you think about moving and uprooting, it's a whole new set of fears. To receiving diagnoses of health, everything that you traverse as a parent is completely different than when you were single or when you were just a couple. It informs and shapes all of that. So certainly that had a lot of the challenges I faced in wanting to come was definitely rooted in motherhood, for sure.
Well, and that brings me to kind of the next place of kind of tell us a little bit about you type of thing when it comes to the education of your kids. This was something else that I really wanted to bring to this conversation, because we are in a place where there's a lot of people that are all in on one thing only when it comes to education. And I think it's important personally to be looking at all the options that exist, not making one thing our sole fix, our sole goal. It's hard to do. I still probably come across that way, as if I only have a one way or the highway. But when it came to the education for your kids, it's kind of had its own little path.
It has.
And I wondered if you could share a little bit about that and your choices, especially with you in the academic world now, versus what it looks like with a 3 and a 5-year-old, and how that progresses.
Oh, definitely. We have traversed it all. I feel like even before I became a mom, grew up and went to small town public school, which was its own thing in its own era and its own time.
Yes.
And then went to a small Christian college, which was its own thing in its own era and its own time, and had its ups and downs.
Yes.
Right. Then went to seminary and taught in public school for many years as well. I was an educator, certified educator, and have
for
taught
music education.
Yep, I've taught everything from kindergarten to 12th grade, high school band. I was the one writing marching band drill, doing choir, concerts, the whole work. And now here I am teaching post-grad as well, and ministry oriented, because I've always been a part of the church as a believer. This has informed everything as well, not just motherhood, but
when we're talking about biblical worldview,
that's right.
That's there.
That's right. It informed everything. And there came a day when teaching music for its own sake was not fulfilling.
Not enough?
Not enough, and being a believer shaped that. That doesn't mean the believer shouldn't be teaching quarter notes, whole notes for music's sake. But for me, I had a specific calling, and the Lord would reveal that later, and that's a whole other story. Nonetheless, in terms of traversing education with my kiddos, you always have these plans for your marriage, and then you get married, and you have plans for the type of mom you're going to be, and then you're a mom,
you have kids.
Right? Right? So pre-children, I had an idea of what I'd like to do, and some of that came to be, but it came from a desire that I think I can look back and see even as a young child myself, and I'll answer the question by kind of going backwards and saying that when I look back, I never thought of myself as being one who wanted to be an educator. I always wanted to be a singer or a musician or a nurse, or I don't know, just any number of things. But when I look back and look at the evidences of me passing out papers around my full-size bed and always pretending to teach, and whether it was teaching from my little children's Bible or making up tests and grades and someone getting in trouble in my bedroom because they were misbehaving or whatever, there was a propensity for the relational aspect of teaching, shaping lives. I think that's what I enjoyed and what drew me to education in general.
Sure.
Now, educating my children, completely different. So they come along, and I think context is everything. Season of life is everything.
Yes.
As a believer, that trumps it all. But as believers, in our church cultures and whatever culture we're in, and I don't mean geographic culture necessarily, though that can be true.
Absolutely.
Show me the Deep South, and it has its own set of standards. But just talking about church culture in general, we can go from one end of the spectrum where we can idolize anything, or we can become elitist, thinking this is the only way, and look down on others who don't follow that way, whether it's from vaccination opinions to educational opinions. Every opinion has its own
way to
tendencies.
polarize. Or polarize.
Yeah,
yes,
right. It's its own spectrum of issues.
Yes.
Education's no different, as you jolly
Correct.
well know.
Yes.
So I felt like I was able to kind of keep at bay and keep perspective those influences that said, if you're a good Christian mom, you're only going to homeschool. Or if you're a solid family, you're not going to be afraid of public school. You're going to put them there and kind of defy.
Right.
There's all this tug of
Yes.
war. But we just realized we had to do what was best in context, which included finances, of course.
Yes, which is the key, one of the key issues, I
Right.
think, for many families.
And what was available. We had to look in time and place and what
Yes.
was before us, which we have to do in all of life.
Right.
Every decision.
Yes.
It's where you
What
are
is
now.
right here.
What is right before you.
Yes.
So when John Franklin, my son, was itty bitty, and I had a baby, a second baby, Olivia. So I had a baby, a little toddler, and we realized this is before we got the call to move out here. We had to start making those educational decisions, kind of getting ahead of it. What are we going to do? Do we need to save money? We need to put him in this classical school that's down the road that I really love. Are we going to do this pre-K? What is it? And even then having to I saw the seeds planted for where we are now. But I decided to homeschool.
Okay.
Because we realized financially we couldn't afford the classical school down the road, even though I tracked with that educationally.
Sure.
But we were in ministry, you have ministry salaries, and maybe your listeners aren't familiar with that, but they are not, they come in a variety of packages.
Doing the big,
That's
you're
right.
Not, don't have Elon Musk type
Right.
paychecks coming your
Who
way,
does?
right?
Who does? Nonetheless.
Sure not us,
So
yeah.
with what we had, I did with what I had. And I guess having been an educator, even though my little niche was music,
Yes.
I didn't feel intimidated having been in the classroom for years to try to educate my children. I had to do a lot of research. I had to accept the fact that I wasn't going to be perfect at this and learn along the way, but I just kind of dove in. And it probably was the most highly organized homeschool teacher you'll ever meet, because I had within me kind of the history of accountability, the history of turning in your lesson plans every week, and or you're fired or whatever. And so that tracked and informed my homeschooling. But then we moved here, and I'd only been homeschooling a year now. So we had to kind of decide what to do there. So again, circumstances have kind of led the way, as it happens in all of life with all decisions. How the Lord leads you, He uses those circumstances, His provision as you pray. And we came here, and we wound up going to a classical school, and that worked for a season. And to be transparent, until my daughter we weren't sure what was going on, but tracking with the fact that what we now know was dyslexia, what we now know was ADHD, and she's done a tremendous job of overcoming and learning how to overcome some of those things. A lot of teachers are surprised she ever had issue with those things, so we're really proud of all she's accomplished. But admittedly, they couldn't, by nature, either being a smaller school or a private school, didn't have the resources to help her in those areas.
Okay.
There was a willingness, but
Yes.
just literally no one to help.
Okay.
So that's when we decided to homeschool,
Okay.
even though I was teaching at the seminary.
So you'd homeschooled, then classical school, private,
school,
and now back to homeschool.
Back to homeschool,
love
because really, even with my teaching at the seminary, there was a flexibility when you're in higher ed that every semester looks different. And it's not Monday through Friday, 8 to 3. It's Monday night, 6 to 8:30, Tuesday morning, 8 to 10. It can be whatever I want it to be.
Which is such a blessing.
It was a blessing,
That's
and so
huge.
I could homeschool. And again, I went full throttle. I chose classical curriculum combined with other things. Nonetheless, well, I will say that I felt like it did its job. We took it year by year. We didn't say, hey, we're going to homeschool forever. In fact, there were some years, and my kids will probably say the same, that we just didn't want to do this anymore.
Right.
Because it is, if you do it right, it's hard work. It's hard work. And a lot of times I just had to say, look, I have to look at this as my job. It's not this side gig I have. It's my job. And I have to think about it. When I go to bed at night and I'm preparing for the next day, I'm not perfect. I wasn't perfect at my music ed job when I worked for a school.
No.
So I had to give myself some grace there. But we tracked with that, and I felt like that one-on-one, if you look at standards, you look online and look, how do you help dyslexia? How do you do those things, that one-on-one? Whether it's a 504 plan in a public school or a private school or whatever, it's always that one-on-one trajectory and these other assistants. And I was able to do that with her. And John Franklin, who didn't have some of those issues, then was able to kind of soar and explore and do above and beyond grade level as well. But then life changed and circumstances changed. Fathers passed away.
Okay.
mothers moving from the East Coast to come live here. So our attention was divided. Circumstances changed. Kids were older. Now they're involved in other activities, and we're thinking, how do we do this? So as we prayed, we just felt like now we're in a new season. So long story short, we eventually wound up at Northland Christian, where we are now, which is a Christian school. Have we, intentionally said no to public school? In some ways, but again, because of where we are, where we bought our home, some of those decisions. But
options and availability, we have them.
Right. And so if I were living back home in the middle of Appalachia, where all my Sunday school teachers were the first grade teacher, the kindergarten teacher, the fifth grade teacher, it'd be completely different.
I think that's a really, really important point, and something that we have talked about a lot is that, and I love it, you said it specifically, it was almost a year by year decision. And I think that is a shift for people when they look into this world of school choice, so to speak, is that it does not have to be the exact thing K through 12 with no exception. I think that is one of my encouragements when I hear parents kind of tossing about ideas, is that please don't marry yourself to one thing. In fact, sometimes I'll talk on here and then somebody will call me and say, are you leaving the school? I'm like, I don't have plans to leave our school.
Right.
But I'm not shutting that door, because it's God first and foremost, obviously what our daughter needs or what our kids need. I think that would be something that I would say to any parent is, please don't think this is all I can do, I should do, or I want, there's always, and to give yourself grace when you might need to shift because of illness or death or jobs or whatever. Right?
I homeschooled when I had cancer.
That's amazing.
We had just made the decision to homeschool. Wow. We had just received kind of what we perceived. It was a little early on, kind of ahead of diagnosis, which would later make sense in retrospect for what Olivia was going through. But we had just made the decision and kind of fired away at all the things, our schedule at the seminary and schedule at life, and made the decision, looked at our finances, made the decision, and fall comes, and so I homeschooled, August, September, October, and November. At the week of Thanksgiving, I was diagnosed with breast cancer.
Wow.
And so thankfully I didn't have to do chemotherapy. But I did have to go through an extensive radiation treatment and surgery and subsequent surgeries to follow.
Which that's got to be a little difficult.
Little kids,
a
little interruption,
and,
a little interruption in the homeschool.
Maybe doesn't look exactly the same
and
every day.
You just say, Lord, really? Did I hear you right? And questioning. But we faced that before with educational decisions, like making a decision and then something happens. Like, really, were we wrong? And that's part of traversing the side of heaven, is doubting and trusting and walking and being faithful. But so there were mornings, second semester of homeschool, that I would get up at dark 30, is what I like to call it, head up to Liberty to do the radiation. And sometimes I would come back to do choir at Midwestern or come back to do homeschool, depending on the day. My kids would stay with my husband in his office or go play in the gymnasium. It was a well-oiled machine. It had to be. And then on the weekends I would crash when radiation has this enigmatic kind of fatigue that kills you at the end. But our kids were in sports. We would do Upward at one of the local churches. So they were active and busy and all the extracurricular things. And that's when we realized we have to traverse this 1 year at a time, always holding hands up like, Lord, what do you have for us? Because kids change, needs change, health changes. But he sustains.
Amen. I think, I don't know, that's just such a message that I wish I had taken in sooner than I did. I know as Chris and I look back, I try not to sit and wallow in regret that I didn't do, I should have done this or should have, but at the same time, it does give me the perspective to tell my own kids, like, you're okay where you are, and you can always adjust it. You can always move. You can always regroup. There's nothing wrong with that. And in fact, I would actually kind of argue that God doesn't want us to stay here all the time. Like, that's not what he has planned for any of us, is to just stay and never grow or shift or fall forward.
That's the point of education.
Right.
That's the point of education, is how our viewpoint, how we see life. We're learning. Education was certainly as big a deal with my children watching me traverse radiation as a mom.
Yes, I cannot even imagine.
And on my last day, I didn't ring a bell. I think maybe I did ring a bell. It was something that they had. I got to know
Yes.
those wonderful ladies so well. They become family. But they kind of broke the rules and allowed my kids to come into the radiation chamber and look around and get a tour, talk with the radiation physician. And that was an education.
Yes.
And when you hold too strongly to this is the way, walk in it, and I'm not speaking about our relationship with Christ.
Sure.
But when we hold too firmly and we don't give ourselves this margin that education is above and beyond the books, certainly it is the core subjects, and we're not necessarily driving them toward a particular career. It can kind of veer off and get crazy to where we just become career oriented.
Right. What versus who are you?
Right.
What do you
But
want to do?
let's
Yes.
educate you. Let's teach you about God's good world. But that extends beyond reading, writing, and arithmetic. It's watching mom and dad handle the news of losing a dad
Yes.
and another dad, or cancer, or the things,
Yes.
or sacrificing not playing sports for a semester because we're helping a grandmother find housing because she just moved here during COVID after just losing her husband. And so, this is education. All of life is education.
And it's funny that you say that, because that is something that I have grown to kind of change my vernacular on, is that I say school, but I'm like, I really am talking about education.
Sure.
It's not just one word. There's so unschooling, even however
Right.
you want to talk about it. But
Right.
I think that's important. That actually, I want to pivot then to the next conversation that I wanted to have with you, because you had specifically said you're ministering to women. That's one of the callings that you feel that you have. So we have our parenting role, we have our marriage role, but one of the, I guess I'll say, directions I've started heading is, how can I learn more to help other women? And when you wrote that was something I wanted to talk to you about. Where I think you have the heart of a teacher, I have a little bit of a heart of a teacher, that to help and encourage. But there's a difference between ministering in faith and ministering just to minister, to help growth. But I want to talk about that growth in faith. Where did that come from, do you think? And how have you seen that? Because you lead Sunday school class, right, for women. Like you're doing multiple things. And I think that's important, that you're not just only in your family or only at work. You're doing more.
Certainly we need to keep that margin as the main thing. As seasons of life change, we're able to do some things and not others. Sometimes
be okay with it.
Be okay with that. Sometimes I've had to turn down a lot of things that I thought that I had a passion for. And there have been seasons where I haven't been able to help women as much, or go get coffee, because I'm at a ball game with my kiddos, and I only have so many years left with them. So no mom guilt is what I'm all for.
Huge.
But I think you're hitting something here. I grew up with no brothers and sisters.
Okay.
Almost everyone in my family was male. I mean, apart from my mother and my grandmothers, obviously, but each parent had a brother. Each brother had a son. So I grew up in kind of a male-dominated home, which was great to some degree, because I grew up not being intimidated by men, loved to have conversation. I could be in the kitchen with
They're
the
not
ladies.
the enemy.
They're not the
Right.
enemy. They were the funniest people I knew. And, and my dad, I can remember sitting beside him at church. He's always rubbing through my hair, playing with my hair. It was a source of comfort and love, the men in my life. But I didn't realize how much I lacked female relationship, or that I felt a little bit at odds knowing how to traverse female relationships until college. And and that was a new area for me. But then I grew really godly female relationships and realized how important it was. And in particular, being kind of, I wouldn't say that anybody thought I was the odd kid, but I felt odd. Okay. Maybe because of my accent coming from Appalachia. Like I called the flying insect a wasper. I'm not making fun. If you're listening in Appalachia, you're saying it just right. It's beautiful. But I got paranoid and kind of tried to, I think what we do in this developmental stage, we try to become what we think our peers want us to be. And sometimes we shave off an accent, or we do kind of things to be accepted.
Sure.
But nonetheless, in terms of engaging women, I look back and realize I needed people to accept me for who I was. We all do. We all want to be loved and known and valued and have a sense of worth. But in my relationships with women, sometimes there could be a lot of pretense or a lot of pressure, like I don't dress like she does. I don't have the designer purse like she does. And I don't want that. I don't need that kind of pressure in my life. So I feel like my natural tendency is to to be free with women so that they don't feel that with me, to be open and vulnerable, because that's what I need. And I feel like every woman needs that. And once you start talking with a woman, a fellow female, and you provide an environment where she can let her guard down and be herself, and there's no pressure, especially in the church, where we can accidentally, inadvertently put up these pressures of who you should be, how you should raise your kids, especially when you're in ministry, what your kids should look like and what they should act like, and did you know your kid did this, and and there can be a lot of pressure, even if people don't intend it and have the best of intentions. And I maybe it's the rebellious side of me. I don't know that I would call it a rebellion, but it is kind of a revolt in saying, let's be real, because that's where the freedom is, when we can be real with it. We're supposed to confess our sins to one another. We're supposed to submit to one another. We're supposed to encourage one another. We can't do that if there's pretense. And so my ministry to women has looked different along the years in every stage of life. As in academics now, it looks like having coffee with a female student who's struggling or just wants to in a mentor relationship. In churches, it's look like, hey, I want to eat, women of all ages. And that's something to get used to.
Well, and that was when you said women's ministry, I actually was like, but let's be very clear. Women's ministry is that 16, 17, 18-year-old all the way to the 85, 90-year-old. It isn't, I think sometimes people hear women's ministry and they think 30 and 40. That's not it. We're talking about
and
everybody.
the needs change in every stage of life.
Right.
In my Sunday school class, I have ladies in their 20s all the way up to probably late 70s or so. And the one thing they have in common is everything they have in common, even if they're single or single again or widowed or never, whatever their season of life or socioeconomic differences, they have in common Christ, and they have in common what it means to be a woman. And what they don't have in common, perhaps, are stages of life. And so I watch them bond with each other and knit together and help one another up, because we are to be teaching the younger women. And everyone is a younger woman. Everyone is an older woman.
Yes.
You don't have to wait until you're above a certain age demographic. Agreed. When you're 25, you can mentor an 18-year-old. When you're 38, you mentor the 25-year-old. At my age, in my 50s now, I can mentor.
Right.
But I also find myself being a pastor's wife, so to speak. Having been, especially in the past, my husband's part-time now, but still in that role where people see you in that way. Even older women will come to me and want help traversing or just talking scripture and need encouragement for their stage of life.
I think that has felt intimidating to me at times. And it actually, during COVID, is when I started to realize how inadequate my knowledge was to help people. And that's kind of when I was like, I need some more biblical knowledge behind me on this, because I know what my gut is telling this person to do. But Chris and I have shared before, we had a woman that called me one day. She was very upset. Our church had shut down during COVID. It was very chaotic and crazy. And she said, I'm just so stressed. This woman was just over 70. And I thought, wow. And my gut was like, you need to leave and find yourself another church, because this one's not serving you. That was my gut reaction, but I wanted to give her other things to stand on, another comfort, that kind of thing. And I think that can be a hard place to be in as a pastor's wife, I would think, within ministry. That's one of the things I feel it's tougher for me to facilitate with people that know so much, have had crazy experiences like you have, versus the student or the person that's finishing up college. And I'm like, well, I'm way past that stage. I don't remember. But it's a neat place to find yourself in, because you can learn from both ends and continue to teach yourself and grow, right?
It has nothing to do with what we each know or our experiences. Right. It has to do with our humanity. We are the church. To be the church to one another is to help hold each other up. It's to help each other cross the finish line
and be real.
And you have to be real. I told a girlfriend the other day, an old girlfriend, she was my roommate in seminary. She and I aspire to be godly old ladies. She's never married. I have. We were both single in seminary together. But I said, Sarah, the godly old lady isn't smiling and passing out candy from her purse because she's just delusional and she has this old lady joy that just is automatic. Right. her joy is there because she does know life's sorrows. She knows loss. She may not talk about it. She knows trial. We just are going to give it to her. We're going to assume that she has seen life full force.
Absolutely.
But she chooses to walk with Christ. She chooses to trust. And in that, she has a joy that radiates in spite of it all, not because she didn't experience anything. And that is a choice to keep following the Lord, to keep following Christ. And that's what we need to spur one another on toward, are those good works and believing what's true about God.
I just think that there's so much importance in that, but there's also a need to go inward as well. So when we talk about women's ministry, we talk about creating groups and creating spaces for all that. I also think there are places where we kind of have to peel back and become focused on our own relationship with Christ first before we go outward. What are some ways that you encourage the women in ministry, when you're there, when you're in your Sunday school class leading it, when you're speaking with somebody over coffee? How do you encourage them, or what do you suggest to them to create that space of a relationship with Jesus versus before they go out with their spouse, with their children, with their friends in their classes? What do you tell them? What do you offer them?
Well, I think I know what you're getting at here. I think first and foremost is to let ladies know they'll never have it together. They'll never be fully equipped to share the gospel. They'll never be fully equipped. They'll never feel ready to help others. Just in the same way I was never ready to be married. I'll never have enough. If I wait till I have enough money to be married,
you're never going to be
that, right? And so you think the Lord doesn't know we're imperfect people. So that's one facet of the conversation, to say, first of all, you're never ready. You never feel prepared. You never feel like you know the scripture enough. You never feel like you're a perfect enough Christian. You know yourself. You know your proclivities. You know your sin. You know your thought life. How could I witness to someone? How could I be a help? If I measured my call or my ability to serve women based on all the faults I have, I would be frozen and never serve. 2 Sundays ago, I didn't even want to show up to church because I was so discouraged in heart about something that was just, I was in my head about something. I felt ill-prepared for Sunday school. I felt like a hypocrite, not because I had committed some sin that was in secret, but at the same time, just in my head, just having a day where believing things that weren't true about myself or the circumstance, discouraged perhaps. But that was the day when I walked in that I was encouraged, because as they shared in prayer requests, they encouraged me. And I realized it's symbiotic. It's this mutual edification. It's not like I'm leader, I know all, I can help you. It's, hey, I'm going to take the leap and be vulnerable here because I know God's calling his church to be this for one another. Let's do this together. It's not me over you, but it's all of us together being vulnerable enough, sharing where we're all seeing that we have a place at helping and serving and encouraging, you know.
I'd like to kind of ask for what are the resources that you would offer to someone, either as a mom or as just, let's say not everybody, because not everybody's a mom, right? So I don't want to just limit it to that. But for the woman that is looking to grow, what specific, outside of the Bible, I would think primary, that's got to be first and foremost. And that is something that I think a lot of us don't do. We don't get ourselves into the Bible first. I know I was guilty of that for a very, very long time. I wanted Jenny Allen's latest book. I wanted to read it. I wanted to use it. And then lo and behold, Jenny Allen is human like all of us. Things shift and change. And all of a sudden I thought, well, some of that theology was probably not super solid. I just use her as one example. There's many, but because they're human, right? But the Bible first, but then beyond the Bible, where are the places, where are the things that you suggest people go as they're trying to be intentional as a parent, as they're trying to be intentional as a wife, as a friend? What do you recommend? Or suggest?
I hear what you're saying, and I'm not evading your question, but I might answer it a little bit non-traditional here. But it's sincere. because it's what I found to be true for my own life. I'm not a big reader, actually, even though
neither is my husband. So I am, and so when I say resource, I don't just necessarily mean book.
Yeah.
But
Right. No.
Right.
I got you, but I'm just preempting that to say I'm not a reader, so I go to other sources. I listen to. I'm a hearer. That's kind of how I process. But that is to say, so I don't have a lot of books to recommend.
Sure.
In fact, I've got a stack of parenting books that perhaps I'll get to when my kids graduate, if that abdicates anyone from guilt.
You don't have no guilt, right?
Or if you're not a mom, we all have this stack of books, and I think there was popular for a season where on social media people took a picture of those stack of books. Here's my read.
Here's my recommendation.
Haul, right?
Yes.
And that's aspiring, but it's also setting up people for failure too. It's hard.
Yeah.
So there's no magic wand. There's no one particular resource. I think it's a way of thinking about life that you need to. Speaking of education, that it is realizing that we have to avoid being in routine and rut where we're just doing all the things, but we're not engaged cognitively or spiritually with the call. What in this season of life has God called me to be? Right now, I'm a mom. Until I was age 35, I was a single young lady. And what God was calling me to do and how I fed my life and how I made sure that I was in authentic relationship with Christ and not just going through the motions. That looked different at age 35 as a single than it does now at age 52 or however old I am right now. I forget.
I have to do some math.
Right.
Math.
And so my intake is limited based on my time and what I'm doing and all that. So I don't ever want to make anybody feel like that there's a certain or particular method.
Yes.
Because we're always looking to check the box. Right, we're always looking for something because we want to get it right. We recognize we have this one life,
which is not wrong in and of itself at all. But you're right. Like I think social media has led to some of that pressure for sure. But I think we grew up that way with like, you do this, you get the A. You don't do this.
Or do you daily devotional? Here's your devotional book.
Yes.
Let's read the open windows each day or whatever it is. Those things are good. Like every one of God's good gifts are good, but they can become in our humanity these things we depend upon to make us feel like we're doing okay, all the while not really walking with the Lord. You know, heads up. What are you communing with Him? Are you talking? Do you have a relationship with Him? Can you stop and just talk with Him, or do you feel like He's so distant because all the good ways you're serving Him have actually, ironically, providentially, are between you and Him? You can hide behind your ministry and not intentionally. You know, our musicians sometimes are always practicing during the Sunday school hour or during the discipleship hour and can go for decades without being fed, and they're going through the motions and they realize they're dead on the inside. So what I would say is whatever season of life you're in, whatever God has given you, whether you're in the role of wife, whether you're a single female, whether you're a mom or not, whether you're older or younger, that having the right priority and making sure that you are abiding in Christ. That is the goal.
Amen.
And so whatever resources you can use to get there, and of course, obviously, Bible first.
Sure.
And shamefully, I've been through seasons. It doesn't matter that I graduated from seminary, even teach at one. I can be so busy doing the things of ministry, which Jesus talked about a lot.
Yes.
So busy doing the things of ministry that I'm not abiding in Him. I can't just... and then I start doubting. I don't feel His presence. I don't feel the fullness of joy. And then I wonder what's going on. Like any relationship, if you're not in communion, if you're not in fellowship, if you're not in communication, you're still married, but you feel like you're two ships passing in the night. So resources, for me, what works for me in my season now.
No, and I think it's fair, right? This is just you.
Right.
I just think that people like ideas. They just like to hear
I
thoughts and think, right? Like they just want to know. So
for me, in this season, I do a lot of listening because I have a multitasking phase of life right now.
Right.
The taxi mom phase, right? I do a lot of listening. I love Alistair Begg. He's a pastor in Northeast Ohio or outside of Cleveland. His Truth for Life podcast, where they kind of take his sermons and make them succinct and make them, kind of in a daily program. I'll listen to that while I'm doing dishes or whatever, or at night. I use the Dwell Bible app because, again, I'm a listener. There's a lot of Bible apps that read out loud, and my comprehension is not great. When I read, I can read the same page 50 times and forget it, So listening, I'll listen to some sort of Bible read aloud. Sometimes I'll even fall asleep to that. but just making sure that I have word intake, that or I'm being very picky about the music that I listen to. As a musician, I've listened to it all, but actually, ironically, I don't listen to a lot of music anymore.
Really?
But what I do listen to is things that feed my soul. So I'll intentionally listen to the group from Australia, one of the best things to come from Australia in a long time, City Alight. They are a fantastic group of young, a collaborative, collective group of musicians in their 20s and 30s, a new generation who have a heart for the Lord, who are wordsmithing deep theological truths into beautiful poetry and lyrics that matter. Because the songs we sing at church should be songs that preach. Because we're not remembering snippets from the sermon. I don't care how wonderful your pastor is. I know your pastor. He's incredible.
He is,
I'm
yes.
sure people remember everything that Dr. Parker says. I do. And it's, so no offense to our pastors, but when you wake up at 2 a.m. in the morning, you're not thinking about sermon note B, and he would probably agree. You're thinking about the truth of God's word that often is carried on a beautifully crafted melody. That's how we learn the ABC, speaking of education, coming full circle. That's how we learn a lot of things. It's God's very good idea. Music is God's very good idea. The craft of poetry, taking big ideas and wordsmithing them in ways that are meaningful and beautiful and memorable. And so finding really good music that always continually, even if it's just a song on my way to go pick up the kids before my son could drive, then I'm listening to it hoping he makes it home, but just those intentional songs, those hymns of the faith. And by hymn, I don't mean, what we sometimes like a worship war of traditional versus contemporary. There's a lot of new hymns today, but hymn being saying that each verse is telling the story. It's reminding me of a truth. It's not, we have psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs, right? But I listen to a lot of hymns, and they're not necessarily old ones that I grew up with. City of Light, new hymn writers. Matt Boswell, new hymn writer. The Gettys, hymn writers. I'm not saying this is the only music. We have freedom in Christ.
Sure. Right.
But what feeds me through music is those intentional lyrics that are reminding me my worth is not in what I own. That's the name of a hymn, one of my favorite hymns. Youth and beauty and fame hurry by, but in the end, all that lasts is my walk with Christ, the truth of who Christ is. And so lyrics that are kind of preaching at me and filling my soul. And when I wake up, whether it's from stage of life insomnia or worry about the new driver in my life or all the things, those truths come back to me because it's either something I've heard on a podcast, it's something I've listened to on music. The things that I have margined for to inform me and direct me and restore me are intentional. If I'm on autopilot in life, I'm going nowhere fast. And I think the key is whomever we are, wherever we are, whatever we're called to do, is to live with intention. And that's what we want to get across to our kids. Live with intention. John Franklin, what are you doing with your life here? I know you're only 16, but give it some thought. Don't go on autopilot here. Give it some thought. You're going to have regrets. You're going to make mistakes, but be an on-purpose person. And that means the things you're allowing in your life, the things you're listening to, the things you're watching. I'm not talking legalism here.
Sure.
We have freedom in Christ, but I'm talking about that intentional input. That's what feeds us. We need that nourishment. So I think there's freedom to decide. If you don't read well, listen. If you don't listen well, read. And I think you hit on a subject too. Not every pastor is trustworthy. Not every author is trustworthy. But you don't avoid either.
No, right.
Because you understand we're all fallible,
Right.
and the Lord will, in His wisdom will guide you there. But the whole point is be intentional. And all of life is an act of worship. Sometimes I ask my students, is this song worship or is me washing dishes at home worship? Or are both worship?
I think that is such a beautiful place to sit and to wrap up for today with this, because if there's one thing I've learned now, and you've just backed it up wonderfully, so I feel pretty good about it. Our ministry is where we are.
Yep.
We do need to sit in that. We do need to feed that. It's not going to look the same from you to me. Everybody laughs and they send me podcasts all the time, and I'm like, I have space for about 2. But if you send me a book, I'm pulling that up, right? And that's what I think it's about, and that's why I ask the questions I ask, because it isn't about dumping everything I'm doing and taking everything you are doing, but making sure that women everywhere know they just need to sit with what works best for them. So I think that is such a good spot. And now I have some new music to look up, because I had not heard of City of Lights, right? I love
amazing,
it. I think that's so great. So I thank you so much, Angela, for taking your time today. I hope, if anything, that as you listen to this or watch it, because people are now, they're doing both, that you do also take that time to think about what's going to work for you in your home, in your marriage, in your circle of influence. I think there's so many different options. So thank you. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
And as always, check this out. Check out the other offerings that Herzog has out for you. And we will see you here next week. Making the Leap is a podcast presentation courtesy of the Herzog Foundation. We'd love your feedback by rating us and commenting on the show.
And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time on Making the Leap.